All right, people, welcome back to Renault's in the studio. My name is Alex, and today we're going to be doing something a little bit different. I'm going to show you how, with the right setup, you can get up to 26 channels of audio into your XR18. I'm honestly not used to producing video for YouTube. I'm much more comfortable streaming when I actually get around to it. So I'm a little out of my comfort zone here. Truth be told, I'm making this video because I'm quite proud of how I managed to put this thing together. It was more than a little complicated and involved some jiggery pokery in order to make this thing do what I wanted it to. So let me show you how I did it. Our rig includes a Behringer XR18 paired with a Midas DN1816O. Not quite sure how you're supposed to say that, but let's go with that. Which allows us to use the XR18 as our audio interface and send 16 different outputs to front of house. This thing costs quite a bit of cash, but it's a popular solution for lots of bands out there. However, I want to preface this by saying, as many others have also said, that you shouldn't use this setup as a splitter. If you have purely analog signals, then you should use an analog splitter. They can't crash. So save yourself the cash and the stress, just get an analog splitter or two. So who is this setup for? The 4816 helps you get more outputs out of your X or MR18. I believe that the systems work almost identically, but I'm only going to say XR18 from this point onwards, as that's what I have. If it doesn't work for the Midas MR18, let me know and I'll make a follow-up video clarifying what does or what doesn't work. I believe the most common use case for the 4816 is to get more monitor mixers. Shout out to Drew Brashler's excellent instructional video for helping me get my setup working. There's a link up here and down here. For both his and my setup, this only works if you don't need the onboard effects in the XR edit. That's the caveat. So to begin with, I totally misunderstood how these devices work. Here is the diagram of how I thought it would work. And unfortunately, I was very, very wrong. I thought for the 18 channels you get for your XR18, that you'd get 16 extra channels to select, giving you a total of, what would that be? Quick maths! 34 channels. Not how it works, unfortunately. The XR18 gets its name from the number of in and outputs it has. It's limited to 18 outputs, and what I have here on the page is a lot more than that. The reason this plan failed is because if you want to send something to the 4816, it has to come through the XR18 first. It takes up a channel or two channels if it's stereo, even if it's not something you want to hear in your in-ears, which is the case for us here. Alright, so we've got XR Edit open. If you open your in-out and you go to the alternate tab, here you can select what you want to go to the 4816. Channel here, I believe, is the analog inputs. You can choose the aux in. You can send effects in stereo here. You can send effects in mono here. You can choose one of the existing 6 in-ear buses. You can even send the main left-right, but because we're doing everything from our DAW, from Reaper, I've got it set to the USB returns right at the end. Ignore this one here, that's just for us, but that's normally what you do. Now, the people who will really benefit from this video are those who want to use a combination of analog and digital inputs. These digital inputs can be either VST instruments, or a click track, audio cues, VST effects. If you only use analog instruments, then this video might not help you get more out of your XR18, but you might learn a thing or two about USB returns. Wait, what the hell is a USB return, I hear you ask? Good question. I was pretty confused about this term when I first heard it. What the programmers of the XR18 intended, at least this is my belief, is that you send the analog input to your DAW, you then apply VST effects, or AAX effects if you're nasty. For example, delay, vocoder, reverb, whatever you want to do from your computer, and then you send it back to the XR18, typically taking over one of the 4 FX channels over here. What we do in Renoist, however, is send outputs from our DAW down these USB returns. If you look at the input tab, let me go over here. If you look at the input tab of these channels, you can see we have selected all of the USB for these. We're using all but a few of them as USB return channels, even the guitar in, because in our case, the amp modeler is a VST effect called Rhino by Aurora DSP. I suppose we're kind of using the USB return correctly for my vocals because we send it to the DAW and then it comes back to the XR18, but we put it on channel 3, 4, 5, 6 instead of FX. Editing Alex here. The reason we put these on channels 3 and 4 is because there are actually some effects on these channels, because we put on some doubling on these channels. And they have to come through the XR18 anyway, so we put them here. We don't actually want to hear the raw audio coming out of my microphone. The synths, however, are on the box. It's just run by a MIDI controller, so there's no analog input for these channels. This is all digital audio coming out of the DAW into our XR18. Now this is where the jiggery pokery begins, because if we only use USB returns, we'd only have 18 channels. As I said, this is the XR18. The maximum number of inputs you can have is 18. Except when we play live, for emergencies, just in case our laptop crashes in the middle of a show, we have a backup microphone which goes through analog channel 16, and an MP3 player which goes in the aux input channels 17 and 18. Because these channels require no processing via our laptop, they're purely analog channels. We only want to hear the raw input. That means we're only using 15 USB returns, which then means we have 3 USB returns that can be put to other uses. On FX1, we use the USB return 1718, which would normally be the aux channel. This channel main out is a mix of all the instruments together that we send to the front of house. And even though this is a channel we don't want to hear on our in-ears, we want to mix the backing track and the instruments together as we prefer, as each person in the band prefers. So everyone has this channel muted. But because of the way the XR18 and the 4816 work together, this channel has to come through XR Edit and take up 2 channels. Now the next bit I'm quite pleased with, because the spare mic takes up USB 16, but USB 15 is in use. USB 15 is the main 4/4 click that keeps us in time. Now normally that would be a problem, as the FX channels have to be a stereo pair. I can't just select USB 16. In our case though, this isn't a problem because I actually want to have both of these in my in-ears. USB 16 is a track with some lead-ins and cues. For example, in our song You Know His Name, the vocals in the chorus come in at an awkward time. At least I find it awkward. I find it difficult to come in at the right time. So I have a count of 3 to help me hit the right beat, and so on and so forth for other songs. Little things like that. So I have the mix of the main click and those audio cues, and normally that would come in on the left and the right ears, but because I have a mono in-ear mix, that means the 2 are summed to mono and I get them in both ears. Perfect. Side note, I personally don't understand the need for a stereo in-ear mix. If you're someone who has to have stereo in-ears, please let me know why that's a must-have for you in the comments. So because we only have 3 analog inputs, while I would like to make use of FX3 and FX4 as USB returns, I can't. If, say, these toms were acoustic, then maybe we could use them as analog channels and that would free up 2 USB returns to use for FX3. Unfortunately, they aren't. We use triggers and then the computer plays the samples. But this isn't the end of the world, as I've used FX4 as intended and put a delay on the backing vocals and the spare microphone. So that's how we use our setup. But let's talk a bit of theory for a second. Getting the absolute most out of your X or MR18. Theoretically, the maximum number of inputs you can get is 18 analog inputs, and the aux must be a stereo pair. And then, with the FX channels, if you don't need the onboard effects, you can then use these as 4 stereo pairs of audio from your DAW. I don't think it's too bad that you're forced to use stereo for some of these channels. At least for us, our VST instruments sound much better in stereo. I would not send mono to front of house. That might be okay for your in-ears if you have a mono mix, who cares? But if you send it to front of house, should be stereo. Now, if you're an electronic band like us, and you don't need all of those analog inputs, you can start changing them over to USB returns or USB inputs. You can have up to 18 digital channels of audio and then 8 analog channels. This is the maximum possible here. Note that you cannot choose an analog input for the FX channels. They must be USB inputs in this setup. So this means that you have 5 stereo channels, 10 inputs, 8 mono. You can use these as stereo if you use the stereo link here, if you prefer. 8 more digital and 8 analog inputs. That's how you squeeze 26 inputs out of this device instead of 18, which was the previous limit. So that's the video. Hope you managed to get something out of it. Give this video a like, subscribe, hit the bell, share it, all that YouTube goodness, and I'll see you in the next one.